Good afternoon, everybody. It's noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern on a Monday. So, you know what that means? It's time for Content Chat. I'm your host, Erica Heald. And today I'm getting to talk about something that is very near and dear to my heart with somebody who I absolutely love and have known for over a decade now, which every time I say things like that, I'm like, OMG, where has this time gone? I'm so excited. Michelle Lynn is my guest today. And Michelle, please take a minute to introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Erica. I was
Mhm.
thinking about right before this, I'm like, how long have Erica and I known each other? And it's at least 10 years, which is mind blowing to me. But I met Erica back when I was working for Content Marketing Institute back in the day. I led their editorial. And since then, after I left CMI, I created my own company called Mantis Research. And what I do all day, every day is help clients conduct and publish survey based research like state of and trend reports that they can use for thought leadership, that they can use as a way to generate a content stream and so forth. So I help clients do it, and I also teach them how to do it. So I meet them wherever their budget is.
And this is exactly why I have Michelle as our guest today, because something that I felt like she always led by example by doing is she really bucked the trend that we kept seeing where we'd have so many organizations release, a single big report and do a big advertising push behind it. All their socials leading to it. And it's just push, 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 download the report. And while, yes, I understand you probably have a lead number you need to, a target you need to hit as a marketer, but there's so much more to proprietary research. It can fuel your thought leadership. It can fuel your content calendar for an entire year. It can make you really, your company, your organization really stand for something and become known for something that resonates with your audience. But it can't do that if you wait until you've actually published the survey report to start thinking about the content. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And I know we just got started here. If for folks who are on watching us live, please take a minute on the LinkedIn page to leave us a comment and let us know if you've ever used proprietary research in your content strategy. If so, what kind of research was it? What did you do? Because it's always really fun to see what other people are doing. Or, for example, if people haven't gotten a chance to do it, what some of the roadblocks have been. And we'll get into all of those kinds of good things and hopefully remove some of them over the course of this lunchtime hour for me and coffee time hour for Michelle.
Iced tea, but yes, exactly.
So let's start by just talking about, how you've seen a lot of brands treat research more like a campaign versus like what you and I consider to be, content marketing and really having content be that strategic pillar.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. Like I mentioned, I used to work for Content Marketing Institute years ago. And one of the things that we did was an annual research report. So Lisa Merton Beach, she ran the research. She still runs the research. I was running editorial. And so I obviously we get a good chance to work on the project. And it's something that I always loved every single year. But one of the things that quite frankly, we did not do a good enough job with was taking that report and turning it into a lot of different content. So we would take that study and we would, blow it out into the first one was always around B2B content marketing. Then we would do a report on B2C and manufacturing and so forth. And we would look at different pain points and I would, say, okay, one of the things that we found marketers were not doing but should be was create a documented marketing strategy. So I would take that and I put a guide together and so forth. But quite frankly, I didn't do enough with it as an editorial person. And so when I left and I started working with others on research, I thought, what a missed opportunity. And how can others take their research report and do so many things with them? They don't need to be, you don't need to like overthink it. It doesn't need to be big. It doesn't need to be overcomplicated. But you have so many different ways to tell stories from one report. It really can generate a lot of different content. So I think what's stopping people is they just aren't, they either don't know what to do or how to do it, or they are so overwhelmed with ideas that they just get paralyzed and they just kind of, because it's almost like you can tell go this way or that way or this way. So I think it's either the, just not thinking about it or the overwhelm because there's so many riches in one report.
Well, it's interesting too, because I feel like, with some frequency, maybe the marketing organization will reach out and they'll hire a research vendor to create the report and maybe to host a webinar talking about the report. Because I've certainly in my in-house days seen some people coming at it from that way. But I feel like it's, when you create any kind of an artificial silo like that, when you don't have the research be part of what everybody on the marketing team is contributing to, and everybody, including PR, because, as Michelle Garrett just noted, PR loves the proprietary research. And I'll say that it was when I was at Highwire PR that I started to actually see PR-led proprietary research that really started from what is the story we want to tell? That's the reason that we're creating the research. Because it wasn't ever just, let's just create research in order to get, some media pickups. It was really, what story are we trying to tell?
100%. And I think it's so important that if you are doing a research report and you want to get PR behind it, this is going to sound obvious, but involve your PR person from the start. Don't like say, here, we ran this study. Here's the data. What do you want to do with it? Ask them from the beginning, like, what kind of questions am I missing? What do your contacts want to know? And quite frankly, do the exact same thing with your writer.
Yep.
Recently my clients have been bringing their writers in earlier in the process, and the writers always provide great insights like, oh, what if we asked the question this way? Or what if we, delved into this topic? So always leave a story and involve the right people from the beginning, the people who are actually going to be telling that story, because that's such a missed opportunity and it's so simple to do.
Totally. So you've had the luxury, though, since you've now been focusing just on proprietary research for a good chunk of time, you've actually gotten to work with a lot of companies. And of course, I'm sure with doing your research and just being immersed in it, you've seen some companies that are doing a really good job of this. So I'd love to hear who some of your favorites are as far as organizations that do more with their proprietary research.
Yeah, so it's so interesting because I am that company that comes in and I actually do help clients on an annual basis. I help them craft their questions, conduct their study, publish their report, write their report, and so forth. And then most of my clients do indeed go off and they do all this stuff on their own. So I can't take credit for anything that my clients are doing. But what I will say, like one example is from FormStack. This is an older study that they did. It was around the state of digital maturity, but they took that one research report. They did webinars, they did speaking conferences, they had a podcast at the time. They did an entire season focused on all these different things that we learned. They took it into blog posts, they took it out to social media and so forth. So it was the marketing team has since been disbanded because of cuts, unfortunately, but it was such a wonderful example of how to take one study, and that research still exists, and how to like just put it into all of the channels that marketing was in at the time, and just be really thoughtful and get it out in so many different ways.
That's totally like Melanie Diesel's, framework for how do you have, 10 ideas that become 100 pieces of content. It's like you look through that lens of what are all the different, ways we can actually put this to work. And it's interesting because I think frequently organizations that have podcasts or a live stream like this, they'll do one episode about the survey results instead of actually taking that opportunity to, oh, you have 10 questions. Well, why not have 10 episodes where you talk to somebody who's an expert around whatever the findings were? I mean, isn't that such the richer opportunity to kind of really get your money's worth?
100%. So I think it really, like you said, it's plugging in what you have into the structure that you've already built. And then the other thing I think is interesting is I think it's also thinking about research differently. And can I share my screen, Erica?
Yeah, go ahead. And if you, the bottom there where you can see the two of us here, we're using StreamYard. There should be a little place where you can choose present.
So I'm going to share my screen.
And after you present,
if it
then I will put
works.
it up on the screen.
Can you see that?
I cannot yet see that.
Oh, shoot. Okay, well, then I'm not going to worry about it. It did not work. Wait, stream this to your audience. So it's not working. So I'm just not going to worry about it. But I will say this, and in fact, I could even put a link to the comment. One of the things I think about when I think about taking research is not only putting it in the channels that you already are in, but it's thinking about how can you think about repurposing differently.
Mhm.
So I created something called the 5 R's of repurposing research, which I was going to show you the model, but it's fine if we can't. But on the most easy thing for you to do is to take and to reuse your research. So it's just taking something that you already have, like a stat or a chart, and republishing it into social media. I think that's really easy, but I think that there's limited usefulness for that. But the next thing that you can do, and this is my favorite way to use research, is to reflect. So that's taking your research into a space such as LinkedIn and asking a question like saying, in our research, we discovered this. Now I'm curious about this. Like, what do you think? Or our research revealed this, which is a challenge for people. What would you do? So I think if you think about how can I use my research to start a meaningful conversation and learn more, I think it's a really interesting way to use research in a way that can make it a lot more meaningful.
100%. And I mean, hopefully the reason that you are asking those questions is because they're things that are important and that no one else has asked. So you're trying to get that stat that doesn't exist, so you become that resource.
Exactly. And I think honestly, as you've known me and I know you, Erica, like we're both very fundamentally grounded in how can I be helpful to my audience.
Yep.
Susan Bear used this term, relentlessly helpful, and which I absolutely love. And I think it's so interesting because how can you use this research to be relentlessly helpful to my audience? So if you always have that bent when you're putting this together and when you're sharing results, I think it makes it easier and it opens up opportunities for how you can use it and what you can actually share, because it's not just I'm pushing out this report. It's like I'm trying to make the lives of my audience better.
And that, plays in really nicely to things like thought leadership, because if you're making their lives easier through the questions you're asking, the data you're, actually getting insights from, and the conversations you're having around that data, then your thought leaders are able to, have facts, data to back up their points of view, which means that all of a sudden you are able to get them those speaking engagements or those media conversations that, without having the data to back them up, it would just be their opinion. And while opinions are great and all, opinions that are backed by data are so much more likely to get traction. And I think especially with,
100%.
AI search, which was our topic last week, AI search is 100% looking for those thought leaders who are talking from a place of experience, but it's also backed up by data.
100%. And I think that there really is no replacement for there's no better way to become a thought leader than to have that actual data that people point to and refer to and so forth.
And Michelle Garrett she's totally on point here with noting that, promoting your research can make you be the go-to on a particular stat. Like Andy Crestodina, for more than 10 years now, has been doing his annual blogging survey, which I love, because too frequently, and this isn't a slam against companies, but sometimes companies will come up with a fantastic piece of research and do it one time and then abandon it. So then that one great stat that we had, it becomes outdated. You don't want to use an old stat. And these days, an old stat is, 3 years old is when people start giving you side eye about using a stat. So, having that thing that you want to talk to people about and committing to it as well.
Exactly. And I think another thing that research can do well is to we'll talk about this in a minute, but to be really uncovering what's going on so that you can figure out what are those missed opportunities, what are those pain points. And so your data doesn't have to solve for those things. It just has to reveal what those things are, because once you know what those things are that where your story hinges, then you can take your thought leadership and take your point of view and really help people with things that you know that they're struggling with. So I look at research as a jumping off point, not the end all be all, but how can it really feed into your strategy of thought leadership and be the data, but also be the source of, what else does my audience want to know about?
And what's really cool about it is when you do this kind of thing and you socialize it with your entire organization, then it also becomes an amazing sales enablement tool and an onboarding tool because it helps the people who work throughout your organization better understand the people that you're trying to reach, what their concerns are, how they're solving their problems. So that's what I love, is that it becomes all of these amazing different kinds of content, not just a lead generation tool, which, yeah, they're fantastic for that. People are willing to put in some sort of an email address, maybe theirs, in order to download that content. But, there's just so much more that we can do. But it really comes with planning with the end in mind. And as you know, that's one of my obsessions because I'm all about the content governance and about thinking through upfront, where is this piece of content going to go? How else do we know it already that we want to use it? Because it's so much more effective and efficient to have that same person at the beginning who's creating that piece of content, who's creating the survey, who's creating the research report, for them to understand all the different places it's going to go and have them at least be doing a good amount of it up front. So that way you're not having to onboard somebody later who wasn't, as invested, who didn't understand why you made some of those decisions. And all of that kind of stuff. So I'd love to get your perspective on, how do you design your research with that reuse in mind? What does that look like?
Yeah, so to your point, beginning with the end in mind, I always think about the stories that you can tell. So again, like I always talk about like data, like a data inventory when you just have all this really boring data. And it seems like I might be overstating that, but I cannot tell you how many marketers I talk to have done their own research and they were like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't really learn anything that was really all that interesting," or I had all this data and I was like, "What do I do with it?" or "How do I use this to be interesting?" So I've run into a lot of marketers who have run into that. So it's always thinking about what stories will I be able to tell. And like I mentioned like a minute ago, how can I use this as a jumping off place to start conversations, to reveal pain points, to show where there's missed opportunities and so forth. So I always ask when we create the survey, what stories can we tell from these questions, to know that no matter how you're going to reuse it, that you will have a good basis for having something that's going to be fundamentally interesting. And then you can take it, and which we'll certainly talk about, is how to take that and how do you decide where to put it. So I don't even so much, for me personally, I don't so much worry about the where it's going to go at first. It's the how you're going to ask the questions to know you're going to have fodder to take it and then to use it in all the places you want to use it in.
I think that's a really good point. Because I think too often folks can get obsessed with, well, we need to ask this question because our competitors' research asked this question and we don't want to have to quote them. So like there can be all of this other kind of stuff that gets in the way of designing a piece of research that's really differentiated and that will actually give your audience something new. I think we get in our own way sometimes when we're doing research.
100%. And something else I do with clients too is I create what I call a research framework. To your point, you're going to have this person say, well, let's ask about this. Well, the competitors ask about this. Let's add this in. Let's add that. And I'm sure if we've done a research project, have scope creep. And everyone's like, oh, if we have these people's attention, let's ask them about all these different things. So what I always do is create a research framework, which is effectively like your main topics or your table of contents for the research. So set that up front and get buy-in from the whole team. Like this is what we are setting out to learn. We're going to learn about these categories. We're going to learn about these subcategories in each of these categories, and having that structure in place. Obviously, you can build your survey from that. You then validate all your questions to make sure you ask those, and then when you tell your story in the back end, this is what you've already set up to learn. But it's also great for helping you avoid scope creep, because here it is, like here's the structure that we've already put into place. So that might be helpful for people if they are indeed dealing with all those different ideas, because it's so easy to be like, we can ask this and this and this. So putting that, like putting those guideposts on, I think is really helpful.
Totally.
Guardrails on is really helpful.
What do you feel like are some of the kind of major pieces of content that in general really mesh well with what you can do with proprietary research and give you, a differentiator? Because, there's so much content out there, but there are just certain things that when they're based on research, that has something really interesting to say that do really well. So I'd love to hear like some of the pieces that you've seen work really well.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think like having one pillar piece, that main research report that you're always linking people to, I think that that's great for SEO and backlinks and so forth. That's an obvious. I think for many, if not all, doing some type of webinar is a really great way to share your research. You could either do one that looks at the overview, like here's all the things we learned. You can invite guests to come to that, or you could do. I've had clients do a series of webinars. So like I just talked about this research framework, I've had clients do like take each topic and do one webinar on each topic and really dig deep. And I think webinars typically work really well because you can get into a lot more depth, and you can also people are also going to give you their valid information, because that's
Yep.
and it's just like, I mean, you know what I mean? If you're trying to get a report, like you said, Erica, maybe they give you the right email or maybe they give you the right info. But with webinars, I think I think that's probably one of the best ways to get leads if that's one of your main goals.
Yep. And I loved the fact that with the latest editions of CMI and Marketing Prof's research, they didn't gate it. The research report, the primary asset, yeah, you can download slides, but the primary asset is a really robust article that has all of the data in it. It has quotes from people to provide context around the insights from the data. And it's just there. And I love that they did that, because guess what? That means that almost any publication will actually link to it. Because if all you have for your research is a landing page or a PDF, there are a lot of platforms, a lot of websites and publications that they have rules around what merits an external link, and they won't link to a landing page for a gated asset. They just won't. They can't.
So speaking from experience, so at least when I was at CMI, which was like 2010 through 2017, we never linked the main research. That was never ever linked for that reason, because we always wanted to use it for brand awareness, to get people to come to the website and so forth. And as someone who used to run editorial, to your point, Erica, when people put a link to a gated form, we typically took those out. Like, we like,
Yep.
please give us something else that people can link to, so it doesn't feel like a promotional piece. And the other thing, and I'm in the very, very early stages of looking at this with one of my clients, is we're even thinking about how, like, LLMs, like, ChatGPT and so forth, how they're bringing in results.
Yeah.
They're not going through forms. So I don't know the mechanisms that I'm not well enough versed to understand the mechanisms of why different, chatbots bring in different types of information. But if your goal is to get cited, the lead gen is not the way to go. But to have a really robust blog post like CMI does, or like Andy does, I think those are going to be gaining in popularity. Because I think there's so much benefit to that than not having something locked in this traditional PDF behind this form.
And, I did an informal poll on LinkedIn where I asked people, said, hey, you've just downloaded a research report, a gated research report. This means you, A, wanted the research, B, wanted a cold call in the next 10 minutes from a salesperson. And guess what? Everyone was like, A. Nobody was like, I'm ready to buy, send me a salesperson. So in a way, it's like we kind of hinder ourselves because we put our best content behind a form that then we are going to go and harass that person who had that initial interest, and then we immediately give them a bad experience.
100%. Like, I've downloaded reports that I've actually written for clients, because you know what I mean? Like, oh, where is that? I couldn't find it in my file because I'm disorganized sometimes. And I go, and now I'm getting all these calls from the company. I'm like, I wrote the report, and you know what I mean? You don't need to call me. But it is a really interesting It's not my preferred experience. I understand why people do it because it does indeed work. But I think if you do things like go to a webinar, or if you figure out what's that next step that someone would take from reading this research and get that thing, I think your experience can be a lot better, and you can really figure
Exactly.
out, get higher quality leads instead of just higher number of leads.
Exactly, which also just means we have to have better KPIs. We have to have better goals, because if your goal is just a bunch of leads, well, we can all get a bunch of leads, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be the right eyeballs. So,
And exactly, and that's why I like to go back to, like, how can this research really be helpful to people? Because I think that when you start to think about it that way, you start to do all of those different things, I think that's what makes it really, really useful.
totally. Well, one of the other things that I think you and I have both seen is a lot of times people don't start doing any kind of outreach or communication or promotion around the proprietary research until that final piece is published, till the research has been done and it's out there and ready to be shared. But really, you need to be, you need to have a communications plan for pre-launch, for launch, and for post launch. There's all of this kind of stuff, so I'd love to hear your perspectives on what a good plan looks like in order to make sure that you are going to get the most mileage for what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you're thinking about, like you said, I think it is a really big missed opportunity where people are not thinking about what can they do to generate interest for their research before it is published. Um, but I think you can absolutely tease results and say, this is one thing of the things that we learned. Do you want to learn more? Have someone like sign up for an email to get the research report when it's ready, or have them comment in your LinkedIn feed, or DM you, or do whatever that is, so you can, as a signal of interest. So when that is ready, you can send it. Backing up even further, if you're getting survey responses using your own lists and your partners list, not using a panel, you can ask people to put their email in to say, hey, please share this report with me when it's published. That's a really helpful way to generate interest. And the other thing I would do, and I know Andy Crestodina does this really well, is he's great about reaching out to people when he has his findings and saying, hey, can you comment on this? Or I saw, that we have a stat about original research, Michelle, can you share what you're thinking? So have all those different people comment in your actual report or your output. So that generates interest from industry leaders in your space, which is really helpful. So that when you launch, you can then, tag those people,
Yeah.
and that can certainly help expand the reach of your research too.
And that's just
So
such a
that's
great collaborative community approach to content, which, and the more people who are invested in the making of it, the more people that are invested in its success after it's public.
100%. And I think it gets people excited. I know Andy does a really nice video where he shares the results, he tags all the people. So I think once your report's ready, having some nice splash, like actually doing a lot with it, doing like LinkedIn posts and a webinar and all of those different things to really give your research the credence it deserves, I think is really helpful. And I think that's probably where most people do the best, because that's what we as marketers are trained to do. We are trained to launch stuff. We're trained to get attention. Um, and then to your point, the third step is, okay, once that's over, what do you do? Like, what's that post-launch activity look like? And that's when I think you have this whole repurposing plan coming into play. I did a study once called, I did a conference presentation once called How to Create a Year's Worth of Content from One Research Study.
I was in
And
that session. That was a
okay,
great session.
but I mean, it's honestly as simple as figuring out, where are we? Where do we want to be? What are those channels? And then figuring out what are the goals that we have with this research? Is it lead gen? Is it brand awareness? Is it so forth? And then marrying up those two things. So do not overcomplicate it, but figure out, where are you? Is it and start to like slot different slots within those channels. You don't even have to know what you're going to say yet, but it can just help to know, I'm going to talk about this in my blog or on LinkedIn, and then so forth. And then from there it becomes, how do I want to share this? And that's, there's a lot of different ways you can make that research come to life.
I recently did some research that I will be including in the book that I'm writing, and something that I did that was fun for me, and I think really got more people, to go in and to answer, to take the assessment, was I did a poll when I started to get some trending results around a specific topic. I went and I asked on LinkedIn. I said, I'm seeing a real significant trend here that nobody is talking about taxonomy. That seems to be the one governance area that the content people are not involved with. And so I did a little poll and I wrote it up in my newsletter. And just doing something like that got people to be so much more aware, one, that I was writing the book, and two, that I had this assessment that they could go take that could look at their readiness and make them think differently around governance. Because I think, for example, people don't think about taxonomy as part of your governance, yet it's so critical because it's usually the biggest mess when you're going in and doing a content audit. It's that taxonomy that ends up messing up all of the analytics results. It's what messes up, people's ability to find the content they're looking for. It messes up the ability for your systems to refer the right content because you have 5 different ways that you're saying the exact same thing with all different tags and different pieces of content assigned to it.
Yes, I mean, I think you and I, like, my brain thinks in bullet lists. Like, I'm like, I have a very taxonomy minded mind. But yes, because that, I think it does, like that. Anyway, I won't go off on a tangent on that, but I do think that is so very, very key, because I don't know how you structure editorial without that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So yes,
So for me, I'd say the poll is really like, this is something that people don't think about. Cause like, but I already did the research. Why would I ask, a poll question? It's like, well, because not everybody got to take your research.
exactly. And I think it's an easy ask. It's much easier to ask someone to comment on my poll than to comment on my LinkedIn post. So I think you're kind of you're trying different things. And the other thing too is just try stuff out, especially if you're doing it on social media. Like, some posts might be great, some posts might go bust. Who cares? I'm a very big believer in just seeing what happens. And, you know, and because research has so many different ways to look at it, there's so many different opportunities that you have.
Do
And
you have,
one other, go ahead.
oh, do you have anything that you think is kind of like an underutilized, lesser like used way of kind of presenting this kind of content? Like, is there something that people just don't do enough of? Because it used to be back in the day, everybody did an infographic whenever they had research, and everybody used to do a slideshare when slideshares could be
Oh my God,
played
SlideShare.
on
Yeah.
LinkedIn. So now everyone's doing a carousel, and now everyone's complaining about everyone doing a carousel. But I'm wondering, are there any things that you've seen to be really effective that you don't see that many people do?
So I'm going to go look at this in two different ways. The first way is when I mentioned before, but I think it bears repeating. I think it's using your research to start a conversation. It's not, I'm going to push out these stats, I'm going to push out this data. It's taking something that you learned and sharing it and asking people to comment on it. It's taking what you learned and say, if we do this study next year, what else would you want to know? So I think that, if you lead with a curious mind, and you're trying to be like, I want to be helpful, I want to learn more, this is a jumping off spot. I think that, I feel like too many people are, even though research is authoritative, they're using it as a place to like push their authority instead of trying to be like, how can we use this to all rise up together, and to all learn more together. So I think that's one hugely underutilized way. And the other thing I would say too is, I think that so many people, when they write their report, they use that as the place where they pull from. But typically, if you do a research study, and if you do it well, you're going to have way too much data, way too many stories you can tell. I don't think it all should go in the report. I think that's way too much cognitive overload for your reader. So pick your narrative, pick your path for your report, and know that in the back end, you have all of this data that you haven't shared. So this could be things like looking at data from, by different segments. So do, men versus women think about something differently? Do different industries look at something differently? And or taking all of like your year-over-year trends and talking about those on social media. So I think you're going to have all of these different cuts of data that you're not going to share in the report. So think about how you can bring those to life, because you're going to have endless data if you are so inclined and want to share it in a lot of different ways.
Well, one of the things I think is great is when you have all of that data, when you have the insights and you've planned that narrative, is hopefully you've also aligned it with your thought leadership strategy and with the different pillars and topics that your primary SMEs are going to be talking about, because then you can give them free reign and be like, okay, these data points and insights around them, these are yours. Go out there and make some hay with them. And that to me is such the interesting opportunity to, going back to what you were saying earlier, to move beyond just being like, here's a bunch of data, good luck. And instead, like, we can ask ChatGPT for a bunch of data. It can totally give us a bunch of data, but your thought leaders can give you the insights that come from the decades of experience in the industry or doing the job function or, working to solve a specific problem. And that to me is, the foundation of creating a really exceptional thought leadership.
Yes, and I don't think that most people spend enough time. They think about, how can I serve this up to my external audience, my clients, my prospects. To your point, I don't think people are nearly spending enough time to say, how can I make this palatable and interesting for my thought leaders who are on LinkedIn? How can I make this usable for sales? So I think that there is a huge opportunity for marketers to package this research up in a way that makes their internal people excited, and give them things to do, um, to actually take it out. Because I do think so often, especially if you're trying to make this research meaningful and have conversations, those conversations are much better coming from a person than the
Yep.
brand of the company. So I think the more that you try to personalize it and make it meaningful, the better it is to come from people. And I'm not a fan of having everyone send the exact same thing. Like, I want to share this, like, here's something that we learned. Can you please share your particular perspective on this? So it's just giving people the leeway and giving people the information to do that. And probably examples and all of these other things too. As we're talking, I'm like, I think that's a huge, like, again, I think it's an opportunity to put like those kits together for the internal team.
I love that. And you do things like you create frameworks. You're just, you weren't able to show it, but we'll link to it in the recap on the web, because I'll get that link from you. Your reuse framework that came out of the research you did on proprietary research. I think that that's something that we don't see enough organizations do, is taking what they've learned, taking their insights, taking that data, and creating models and frameworks. One organization I know of that does a good job of that, because they were my client and I've like read so much of their work, is Blanchard. So they're the leadership, executive training and coaching company. And they have all of these great models and frameworks that are 100% built on their 40 years of doing research around what makes a great leader. What are the skills you need? And it's just fascinating to me, because they'll take all this data, and their goal is to always to turn it into something that is simple to remember and practical to put into use. And it seems like, it's kind of brilliant content, right? That's just exactly what we should be doing as content marketers.
100%. And I think that there's a lot of different ways. Like, even when you talk about framework, I think that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. But I think your framework can be as simple as identifying, what are those people who are successful or effective doing differently, and then test for those things. Like, I just ran this survey, and we had 10 different things that we were calling success factors. We wanted to learn, are people doing this, and are those who are self-defined as more successful or effective doing these things differently. So it could be as simple as doing something like that. But I've also worked with clients, and we've put together far more robust frameworks, which I was going to show you an example, but again, my screen sharing is not working, but I can send you a link. But we put together, like, we want to study, these 4 categories, and then we create questions for each of these 4 categories to assess where someone is. And then we looked at the whole population to figure out where they were. We had like limited, where it was limited, sorry, poor vision. Limited, invested, refined, optimized. So along these categories, we had this big matrix of here's where people fall, here's what you need to do if you're, limited, here's how you get to the next step, and so forth. So it definitely requires a lot more upfront work. And I think it's probably not best for your first research project, because you really do need something like you need to know enough to have a stake in the ground to say this is what we believe that this framework is.
Yeah.
But this was ForumStack's example that I mentioned earlier. They did so much with that one research study, because it was so very rich and it was all based on this really robust framework.
And Michelle, again, coming from her PR background, you got to have the insights are there. That's the real value. Yeah, that data point is fantastic and is going to get quoted everywhere, but the insights are what make you memorable, and it's what makes your content stand out. And if you're not able to do that, if you're finding that your internal thought leaders are not able to provide that, that means that maybe you don't have, and this is, a spicy opinion, but maybe you don't have the right people as part of your thought leadership program. Because, for example, a lot of times people will have maybe their CEO and one other executive as being, the ordained thought leaders that get the support from the comms team and the content team. But your CEO has a lot of things to do. They have a very big job. They may not be the right person to do that. You might actually need somebody in your organization who is more of that person who's going out there and doing the thought leadership, doing the connection, being the champion for the expertise your company brings to what you offer, and who really is that person out there sharing the insights. So I think if you're struggling doing this, sometimes it's because you just don't have the right person being tasked with it.
And to add one other thing to that, Erica, completely, I'm on the same page with you. I think sometimes too, people overcomplicate it. They think, oh my gosh, we have all this data, we have to put all of this data out. And they're not thinking about simplify. Sometimes the answer is you need less data. You need the insight and not the data, because too many numbers are you're going to have cognitive overload. So not only making sure you have the right people, but making sure that you are positioning and communicating the data in a way that's actually palatable and easily understandable by your thought leaders and by the audience, so it doesn't feel overwhelming.
Totally. Which goes right back to, how did you plan it in the first place? And when you've, put everything in place with that end goal in mind of who's going to be talking about it, what that, successful launch of the research looks like, I think all of that just makes it so much easier, because then you're not guessing at the end where you're going, because you wouldn't get in the car, hopefully, and just drive and hope that you get to where you're going.
Yes. And the other thing too, we talked about bringing in PR and bringing in writers, bringing your SMEs who you want to be sharing that. The more that people feel bought in, the more that the things that they're excited about, the more they're actually going to go out and actually share it. So just be thoughtful.
Totally. Well, I shared my bias earlier into, having research that is something that you make a commitment to. Maybe you don't ask all of those same 10 questions every time, but, I've been part of a number of ongoing, things like retirement index or CFO index, where you're going out on a regular basis. Sometimes, some groups have done it quarterly if it's something that has a lot of volatility, or they do it annually if it's something that really goes more like along with budget cycles. But making that commitment to doing it annually, it gives you some interesting opportunities. So that way it's not just that you're leading up to getting people to take it, then launching it, and then it goes away. Instead, it can kind of become that wave. So I'd love to hear your thoughts around, if you are going to make that commitment, then how do you keep the interest, and how do you address things kind of in between editions?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting, and I'm a very big believer in annual studies. At CMI, we did this on an annual basis, and what we always did was our conference used to be in September. I know now I think it's always in the fall, but it changes a bit from month to month, I think now, or year to year. But we would always do the survey in the summer, have the results ready prior to the conference, we would tease the results at the conference, use the conference to interview people and start to get content around the things that we saw. And then we would, a month, or I don't know, was a little bit after the conference, we would then launch our first research report. So I think this doesn't directly answer your question, but to have this cadence and to have it revolve around something that makes sense, I think keeps it really meaningful, because you're always kind of, you're doing the research, you're launching, you're teasing it, you're launching it, you're doing more, you have your whole cycle of repurposed content until the next time you run it, and so forth. So I think when people can expect what's going to happen, I think that can really help.
Sometimes though, everything gets upended. Like, I can imagine that if I was doing anything right now that was around, I don't know, government funding, around so many things that have really changed over the past 4 months, I would be looking at my research and thinking, maybe we need to do a mid-year update. Like, can you do that? Can you purposefully deviate from your schedule if everything is if there's some sort of rapid change?
100%. And I know you mentioned earlier, Erica, about, looking at stats. I mean, sometimes, like, many stats that are now 3 years old are going to be so obsolete, they're not going to be useful at all. So I almost feel like we have these evergreen stats and we have these more volatile stats, for lack of a better word. And I think that when you're asking questions, you need to have a sense of, and you usually do have a sense of, is this something that's going to change quickly, or is this something that is going to be pretty static? So I think you generally know in advance, not always, but you generally know, like, is this something that I'm going to want to repeat every quarter, every mid-year? Excuse me. And if something does indeed change mid-year and you want to, run it again, I think that makes a lot of sense. The only issue is that you then have to, find more people to take your survey, field a panel, and do that. But I think it's a very, very valid thing to do. But on the other side, I've heard people say, oh, my data feels a little bit old. It's almost a year old. I don't want to share it. If the data is evergreen, don't worry about that so much, because it's still going to be relevant. So it's
and maybe it's an opportunity to do a poll, to like reach out to your, right? You can reach out to your community and say, 8 months ago, here's what we heard from you, but it feels like so much has changed, and ask people to comment. And then frankly, then that helps you figure out how you can update that question, or if the question's even still at all relevant for your next round of research before you write it.
I never thought of that idea, Erica, but I love that. That's really smart. And it's that constant way to, you said, keep it in the mind of your readers, and just, again, making it meaningful.
Exactly, which is the whole point. It's not,
which is the whole point.
You're not just, creating this report so it can live on your website and have nobody actually find it to be useful. You want it to actually be, helpful to them and help them do their jobs differently and better. And, at least to me, that's the whole point of doing research.
Yes. And I will say too, with annual studies, if you have done them before, it is surprising oftentimes how little changes from year to year. So I always like to keep a core group of questions in there that are something that you do want to trend year over year, but take some out, make room for new ones. Otherwise, you're going to get really bored. It's going to feel hard, because you're like, okay, we already know this. So always make sure that annual studies are fantastic, because you do have all that, trends that no one else has, but you also need to unearth something new every time too.
Totally agreed. And we do have some questions from folks, so I want to share them. The first one is, how do you figure out which data points you want to highlight? So especially if you have a really juicy report, like, how do you decide what goes in the executive summary or in the press release about it? And I know this is something, probably the biggest areas of contention and, disagreement when I've done a research report is around which things to put in, up front versus what to hold back for later. So how do you decide? How do you help your clients make those decisions?
I mean, it's a great question. And I feel like sometimes this is not answering your question directly yet, but honestly, it's looking at the data, putting it all together, stepping back, coming back, looking at it and say, okay, did I actually capture it? So I think you need the momentum so you don't lose your train of thought, but you need that breathing space to actually see, is the story actually clear? So I think I cannot tell you how many times when I look at something like this recently, I actually presented to one of my clients twice. I did their marketing team, and then second I did their leadership team, and there was a week in between. Just having those two calls and those two different meetings, like how to present that story became so much clearer to me because I had to do it twice and I had that week's breathing room. So I think that's one thing that makes it easier. And then two, I would think about this might sound counterintuitive, but how can you tell your executive summary? What story do you want to tell in your executive summary that does not have data in it? So if you could remove all those data points and you were just going to tell a really simple story about what you learned in your research, what would that be? And I think sometimes people get so caught up in the sticking so much data in it. Know what the data says, but if you didn't have the data, what story what story jumps out that's going to be most meaningful to people? Tell that and then add that data in, certainly, but don't lead with story first, then the data.
Which goes back to the making sure that you're focusing on the insights
Yes.
you have gleaned, the big aha moment that your team had when reviewing the data, versus leaning in just on that one data point. Unless that one data point is something that is so shocking and, revolutionary, like 90% of all CEOs say they're going to replace their entire marketing team with AI bots. Okay, fine. Put that in the executive summary because that's the story you want to tell. Then yes, lean in and lead with that data. But I think in most cases, it is better to have like the big trends that that you found. But it also depends too on what your strategy is going to be for reusing that content. Are you going to do pieces of content for every single data point, or are you going to be grouping them together? So knowing all of that all is going to influence too, because you want to make sure whatever that big overarching announcement is, whatever you highlight there, that it supports all the derivative pieces that you want to branch out to, because you don't want it to really limit you and to kind of like box you in. You want it to be big enough that people aren't going to be like, well, how does that relate? Hey, well, how does this relate to the announcement of the research? Where did that come from?
Yes, I do think you need that those big couple big 1 or 2 to 3 headlines throughout the whole project. Like, this is what we learned. But I think you can also say, we'll be publishing more about, these are our key findings. This is what we learned. But stay tuned or sign up. We're going to be publishing, more insights that get more nuanced around different data and different segments. So, join us to learn more. So I think it's an opportunity as well to kick off that repurposing. Even if it's not all in the report.
Totally agreed. Michelle Garrett asked a question that I know whenever we've done our conversations over the years about research, it always comes up. So what about a situation with companies that have a pretty small budget when it comes to conducting research? What are some of your tips for being able to do really great, impactful research on a tight budget?
So make sure that the survey-based research is the right type of research you want to do. It could make sense. I would typically go see how much it would cost. It's either going to cost time, or it's going to cost money, or it's going to cost both. Understand, like, if you can reach out to your own audience, that's a great way to do research on a budget. Yeah. If you need to pay people to respond to your research, you need to pay for this panel. Understand what that costs before you even before making the decision is this in my budget?
Yeah.
Like I said, a lot of times survey-based research, as much as I love it, is not the right approach. So think about how can you do qualitative studies or observational research or dig into first-party data. But let's say you do decide first survey-based research is the way to go. I think it's really helpful to understand what steps you need to follow. And if anything, if you have budget for anything, get help with your survey questions, because the whole thing is predicated on that. And if you get those wrong, or you get really boring data, you don't have a great press release, you don't have a great report. It's really hard to repurpose boring data. So that's the one place I always recommend that people invest, is getting help with those survey questions, because you don't know what you don't know until it's too late.
Yeah. And, and take the time to let people see your survey before you launch it, especially if you're having to pay or advertise to get people, because seeing, letting people who understand the research topic take it is fantastic. And I mean, I'll give the example for my assessment. One of the people who took it gave me some feedback around one of my questions, which is, which was about using AI. And it's like, well, we're not planning to ever use AI in this way. So then I added that in because I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Because you want to make sure that your assumptions and your experience isn't causing you to overlook an obvious answer, because you don't want people to drop out, because there are people who will just answer something randomly and go ahead, and you don't want that either. But there are a lot of people that will drop out. But guess what? Also, sometimes you're doing that on purpose. Like where I have with my assessment up front, it asks, what your role is with content. And guess what? If your role isn't any of those things related to content, I wanted you to drop out. And if you don't have a content strategy, I didn't necessarily want you to drop out. But if that question rubbed you the wrong way, then the rest of the survey, the rest of the stuff is definitely gonna give you feels that you don't want. So, having some of those questions up front that do cause people to drop out, understanding what those questions might be, so that way you can make sure that the data that you get and the story that you tell is valid. Because what if you had, you asked some of those questions at the end, then all of your data could be kind of baloney, because you would have people who aren't actually involved in creating content taking, a survey about creating content. So then they're just,
Yes. Always, always, always ask screeners at the beginning to make sure you're surveying the right people. It's better to have fewer of the right people than just more. And because you're like, to your extent, your data is going to be junk.
100%. Well, this hour has flown by, Michelle, which is no surprise because it always does when we're chatting. But I want to give you a chance to tell folks where they can find more from you and learn more about creating really amazing proprietary research.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm also in the process of updating my website. Hopefully it'll be published, I'm hoping, in the next week or two. So after then, go look at it. But it talks all about what I do, how I help others, and so forth. So it's at mantisresearch.com.
Fantastic. And we'll be linking to that in the show notes for those of you watching this on replay. Next week,
thank you, Erica.
There's gonna be no content chat next week, so I'm taking the week off because everybody needs a spring break. I need to go play in the dirt in the garden.
That sounds perfect.
It's gonna be a staycation. So we'll be back in 2 weeks. So until then, bye everybody.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Erica.